I've been running now for more than 30 years. And I also competed in a lot of races. And for a long time, the racing was actually the point, the goal that I wanted to achieve, the thing that gave me the satisfaction. I was kind of obsessed by the finish times, the training blocks, and the particular satisfaction of a number on a clock that's supposed to prove something, or the entry into Strava. But somewhere along the way, the racing became less interesting than what was happening underneath it. Today, I don't worry so much about performance anymore, or about competing or proving something. Today, it's actually the act of running itself that makes me happy and that fulfills me. And the most satisfying is this feeling when I'm completely alone, when there's nothing, when nobody sees me, or when it's even shit weather outside and I'm the only one on the road. Just me and my 2 dogs. No finish line, no glory, nothing. And you know what happened? At some point in the second half of life, the things that used to feel like purpose, they start to feel more like motion. You're still able to produce, you're still achieving. But the question underneath it has shifted to something else. It's not anymore, how do I do more? Instead, the question is, why was I doing this in the first place? And you know what? Most people don't have a good answer to that, because the doing itself was always loud enough to drown it out. And for me personally, running has been the place where that question couldn't be drowned out. So 30 years of early mornings, standing up at 5 a.m., going out into the dark, running, in the rain, in the snow, in the cold, in the heat, that leads to a body that eventually stops lying to you. So for me, running wasn't just like a fitness practice or something to become more lean. It's also not something just to fit in my race schedule anymore. The running is more like a mirror into myself. And what it is reflecting consistently is the self I was yesterday. And the question whether I was willing to move past it. So that might be a very controversial way of talking about running. And to be honest with you, the fitness industry and most people I know, they don't talk about it in this way. Because most of what gets said about endurance sport is about performance. It's about metrics, it's about optimization, and it's about output. And that's also okay, because this framing is not wrong, but it's missing something that matters more, at least to me, at least to real runners. And what it misses is exactly what Nietzsche spent a significant part of his philosophy trying to name. Running, especially long distances, has been that practice for me. And in this video, I want to show you why the way most people approach it makes the deeper question harder to answer and not easier. So if you're a runner or any other endurance athlete, that's your chance to reflect on your why. So let's start by addressing the problem with how we talk about running. And this is mainly shaped by the self-optimization industry, because they have been doing something very effective to endurance sports. They turned running into a performance metric. We're discussing heart rate zones, we're discussing VA2 max, training load, recovery scores. That means the language of the lab has colonized what used to be a deeply human practice. Can you still imagine today to go for a run without your Garmin on your wrist? I couldn't for many years. And I also understand the appeal behind it, because measurement feels like progress. You know, there's this saying, what you can't measure, you can't improve. The only problem with it is it becomes a little bit sterilized. So I want to address today a different viewpoint. And that's basically the difference between optimizing a run and being changed by a run. Because in the last years, I see long-distance running as self-overcoming philosophy. And that might sound now academic until you've been on a trail at mile 18 and then had to decide who you are. I think the running community today is almost entirely missing, or maybe also ignoring, what Nietzsche was pointing out. And it's not because they lack intelligence, but because the framework they're working with is the wrong one. Because performance is about output, but self-overcoming is about, as the name says it, about yourself. So if you see running in this way, it's not the same practice anymore. Keep in mind, only one of these mindsets can change who you are. So let's have a look on what Nietzsche actually said or wrote. And life itself confided the secret to me. Behold, I am that which must always overcome itself. That line is from Thus Spake Zarathustra. And even if it's quoted today many times on social media, Nietzsche didn't mean it as a motivational quote. Because he wanted to describe what life actually is. And he described life as a process that cannot remain static, but something that must continuously exceed what it was. And Nietzsche called it Selbstüberwindung, or in English, self-overcoming. And that's the process when you actually become conscious and chosen. And self-overcoming doesn't mean that you have to overcome your weak parts and just becoming stronger in a gym sense. It's more about the self continuously exceeding the self it was yesterday. Okay, let's be clear here. Not the self it wants to be, the self it was. And that distinction matters, because the self you were yesterday is always present in the long run. Because that is the voice that knows exactly how tired you are. It's the voice that has a very reasonable case for stopping and going home, and getting dinner instead, and having a beer. And the question Nietzsche actually was asking is, what kind of person do you become when you answer that voice, over and over, across many years, not only in a single session? It's voluntary suffering growth. This is what Nietzsche understood that the fitness industry doesn't. He said the suffering have to be a part of it. The suffering is not a side effect to be minimized, because the choice to continue, even when there's pain, this is where the self actually gets forged. And it becomes even more tangible in Nietzsche's concept, will to power. And by will to power, he didn't mean to dominate other people or to be better than other people. He was talking about mastery over yourself, the self that wants to stop. And you can test this will to power in every long run. So let me tell you what actually happens on the long run, because most people who haven't done it, they won't know. So let's go through the different mental phases that you're going through in a long run. The first 20 minutes are almost always a negotiation with your body. So your legs are still stiff, the breathing haven't settled, and the mind starts generating reasons to stop before you've even properly started. But that's not a sign of weakness. That's actually the body doing exactly what it was designed to do. And this is to conserve energy. So you have to push through it, and somewhere around, 20, 30 minutes, something shifts. And I don't mean with that the resistance disappears in some way, but it changes its character. It becomes something you're working with rather than against. And you're getting in a flow. And this flow holds on for a while. But then much later, and this depends on your physical condition, you'll hit a wall again. Let me give you an example. On a recent run, roughly after 20 kilometers or something like that, it was more like kind of a trail run through the forest. And there was nothing dramatic about the conditions. But suddenly I felt something was slowing me down. I mean, my legs were still fine, my breathing was fine, but something else started speaking. And the thought was very specific, like something like, this is enough, you've done enough, you can stop here and it will still have been a good run. And that's not a random thought. Such thoughts come up frequently in similar ways when we challenge ourselves. And that thought is the shadow of the comfortable self. It's the part of the personality that was built around ease, around comfort, around optimization, and around the anti-reasonable preference for not suffering unnecessarily. And the choice that you make in this moment is not really about the run. The deeper choice is actually about which part of yourself gets to define what enough means. So I decided I keep running. And not because I'm very disciplined in some admirable way. Actually, I'm not a very disciplined person. But because 30 years of this practice has made it very clear to me what happens to the self that stops at that moment. And what happens to the self that doesn't. And that it's actually not always better to stop in this moment, to listen to your comfortable self, but to continue. Carl Jung would have recognized that voice immediately. And we have to understand here that the shadow is not our enemy. It's not that it wants us to be lazy or that it wants us to be weak or something like that. The shadow is also part of our identity, and its intention is also to protect ourselves, to make the best for us. But it's also the part of the personality that was excluded from the conscious identity that you built up over the years. So if your conscious identity is a person who runs, a person who chooses difficulty, a person who chooses growth, then the shadow carries everything that was left out. The comfort seeker, the optimizer, the part that wants to rest. And this part starts to speak up when it's getting uncomfortable. That could be at mile 8, at kilometer 10, or wherever your particular wall is. And it speaks loudly because it has been waiting. And negotiating with this voice is something you learn with practice and with consistency. So running can become shadow work in motion in a very specific way. Because your ego's resistance is the shadow speaking, and the choice to continue is an act of integration. It's not that you're leaving your shadow behind. You take it with you, and you're going through this together. So you're not defeating your comfortable self. You're acknowledging it, you're hearing it, and then you're choosing differently anyway. And that is not suppression. That is the difference between running from something and running through something. And after 30 years, I got a very clear relationship with that voice. I know all its arguments by heart. And I know that the run that requires overcoming is the only run that changes anything. And the only one that matters, actually. Sometimes people ask me what 30 years of running has done to me physically. And this question is valid, but it's not really the important question. But I can also understand why it's the first one. But the more honest question would be, what 30 years of choosing difficulty over comfort has produced in terms of character? And I think even though I'm physically in a good shape today with almost 50 years, but the greater benefit I get from running is the adaptation of my mindset and also my philosophical way of living. Because if you continue to make the same choice, and I'm not saying that it's the right or the wrong choice, I'm saying this without any judgment, but my choice was many times continue through the resistance. And if you continue this choice over many decades, that builds something that you don't have a fitness equivalent for it. That means I've built a relationship with my own resistance that is fundamentally different from someone who has always optimized for comfort. And I know from direct experience that the self on the other side of the hard choice is not the same self that faced it. And the most important thing is this knowledge is not theoretical. That's embodied wisdom, embodied knowledge. It lives in the legs, in the lungs, in the specific memory of every run that required something real. But it doesn't stay there. It transfers also in other parts of your life and of your body. Because the same negotiation you have at kilometer 15 or 20 is the same negotiation that happens in a difficult conversation with your partner, with your boss, or in a career decision, or in any moment where the comfortable path and the right path diverge. The practice prepares you for that. So there is a run that was easy, and there's a run that required overcoming. And both of them count in the training log, and both of them have their validity. But only one of them changes you. That's the distinction Nietzsche was making, and it applies far beyond running. Voluntary suffering grows. And it's all about the word voluntary. Because this is doing all the work there. We choose the suffering. It's our choice. And by that, we're growing. You choose the difficulty. Nobody required it of you. The suffering was not imposed. It was selected because you understood, consciously or not, that something on the other side of it was worth having. And that's categorically different from suffering that happens to you, that we cannot influence. But the self that emerges from chosen difficulty, repeated across years, is a self that has been tested in a way that comfort cannot replicate. This is what Nietzsche meant by self-overcoming. It's the self continuously exceeding itself. And it's not a one-year event, not a summit event, not a marathon that you run once a year. It's a daily practice. So if you're in your second half of your life and the question underneath everything has gotten louder, the why I'm doing this question, I want to suggest something. The answer is not going to come from doing more of what you've already been doing. It's going to come from a practice that puts you in direct contact with your own resistance. And running could be one arena for that. It's one of my favorite ones, but I have similar effects in long bike rides or in long hikes or also in long swims. But running has been the most honest teacher I've had. So what I want to bring across is that physical challenge transformation is not some kind of a fitness story. It's not about losing 2 pounds or getting a little bit faster. It's also not about beating your colleague on the next 10K run. What I'm describing is something else. It's the slow, unglamorous, deeply personal process of becoming someone who has chosen difficulty enough times that the choice itself has changed them. And that is what Nietzsche describes. That is what 30 years of long runs have taught me. Because every run is a negotiation with the self I was yesterday. And the point for me is not to win the negotiation. The point is to keep showing up for it. And if this kind of thinking is useful to you, there's more of it here. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great run.